The apartment smelled wrong. That was the first thing Harlan Beckett noticed when he pushed open the front door at 5:15 in the morning. Not wrong in any dramatic way. No overturned furniture, no broken glass. Just wrong in the way a house smells when the life has been quietly removed from it, like air that's been sitting too long in an empty jar. He stood in the doorway of their Westmount condo, still wearing his coat, still holding his keys. The city of Montreal glittered indifferently through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His wife's name rose in his throat and died there. The bassinet was gone. The diaper bag that always hung on the hook by the entryway was gone. The small stack of library books she'd been reading, the ones about infant sleep and postpartum nutrition, were gone from the coffee table, leaving only 4 pale squares in the dust. Harlan walked slowly to the kitchen. On the white marble island, beside his spare house key, lay a single USB drive, and next to it, a folded piece of paper. He didn't reach for it right away. He stood there for a long moment, his reflection caught faintly in the dark window, a man in a wrinkled shirt beginning to understand the shape of what he'd done. Then he opened the note. Harlan, by the time you read this, the twins and I are somewhere you won't think to look. My lawyer will be in touch. Don't call. Rowena. He read it twice, then a third time. His wife's handwriting was always small and precise, the kind that belonged to someone who chose their words before they committed them to the page. Even leaving, she had done carefully, without drama, without the screaming match he might have talked his way out of. Harlan Beckett sat down on the kitchen floor. That was not something he would have predicted about himself. 9 months earlier, Rowena Ashby had arrived in Montreal from Halifax with 1 suitcase, a nursing degree from Dalhousie, and the particular brand of optimism that belongs to people who have never been truly broken. She was 34 years old, careful with money, slow to trust, and possessed of a laugh that seemed to catch people off guard. Too full, too real, not what they expected from her composed exterior. She had met Harlan at a colleague's dinner party in the spring. He was 41, vice president of a commercial real estate firm, the kind of man who made a room rearrange itself around him without appearing to try. He had a way of listening, really listening, chin slightly down, eyes steady, that made people feel chosen. Rowena had not been immune. They married 14 months later. She knew it was fast. Her mother had said so from Dartmouth, voice careful over the phone. Her best friend Sabine had said so over 2 glasses of wine at a Queen Street bar in Toronto the weekend of The Bachelorette. But Harlan was attentive in ways her previous relationships had not been, and Montreal felt like an adventure. And the condo on Sherbrooke West had a room they'd already decided to paint yellow. The twins were born 7 months into the marriage. A boy and a girl, early, small, insistent. The NICU at the Montreal General became Rowena's whole world for 3 weeks. She was there every morning when visiting hours opened and had to be gently encouraged to leave at night. She learned the nurses' names, their schedules, the particular sound each monitor made. She sang to her babies through the incubator ports, her palm pressed to the glass, learning the geography of their faces. Harlan visited when he could. That was how he framed it. When he could. And Rowena, running on hospital coffee and the tight, desperate love of a new mother, accepted it for longer than she should have. The first real crack came on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Just an ordinary one, the kind that breaks things without announcing itself. The twins had finally come home 4 days earlier, and Rowena was moving through the condo on 2 hours of sleep, relearning the geography of her own kitchen, when she found a receipt in the breast pocket of Harlan's blazer while moving his dry cleaning. Dinner for 2, the Laurie Raphael restaurant on the waterfront. A Wednesday night 3 weeks ago, the same Wednesday he'd texted her. Stuck at the office. Big pitch tomorrow. Don't wait up. The bill was $460. Rowena stood in the laundry room for a long time. Then she folded the receipt carefully the way she did with everything, and put it in the inside pocket of her own coat. She didn't confront him. She started paying attention instead. What she found over the following weeks happened in fragments. A name that appeared too often in his calendar, K. Moreau, listed simply as meeting, and then disappeared from it entirely, replaced by increasingly vague entries. A perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to the collar of a shirt he'd claimed to wear to a site visit. A weekend conference in Quebec City that she later confirmed, through a mutual colleague, had been canceled 2 weeks before Harlan attended it. She couldn't prove anything. Not yet. But she'd been a nurse long enough to know that when a patient's vitals start trending quietly in the wrong direction, you don't wait for the obvious emergency. You start charting. So she did. The night she found the emails was the same night the twins refused to sleep. It was 2 in the morning. Rowena had been up since midnight, walking the hallway with her daughter against her chest, humming softly, when she heard the soft chime of Harlan's laptop on the kitchen counter, an email notification he hadn't bothered to silence. He was asleep in the bedroom. She hadn't woken him to help. She'd stopped asking 3 weeks ago. She didn't mean to look. She almost didn't. But the name on the notification preview was K. Moreau, and the subject line was 3 words that rearranged everything. After she's served, Rowena stood very still in the dark kitchen. Her daughter made a small sound against her shoulder. She pressed her lips to the baby's temple and breathed. Then she opened the laptop. The email thread went back 8 months. Before the twins were born. Before she'd even been suspicious. Catherine Moreau, not a colleague, not a client, but a woman Harlan had apparently been seeing since the year before their wedding, was meticulous. The thread read like a legal strategy. There were references to a document Harlan had had Rowena sign at 32 weeks pregnant, something he'd described as a beneficiary update for his insurance. There were references to a custody arrangement, full physical to Harlan, limited visitation, instability clause on her side, that had been drafted not by a stranger, but by Harlan's own family lawyer. There was a message from Catherine dated the day after the twins came home from the NICU that simply read, "Almost." Rowena closed the laptop. She carried her daughter back down the hallway. She laid her in the crib beside her sleeping brother. She stood there for a long time in the dark, watching their small chests rise and fall. Then she went back to the kitchen, reopened the laptop, and photographed every screen with her phone. She wasn't screaming inside. That surprised her. It was something quieter than that. A cold, focused clarity, like a nursing assessment, clicking into place. A list of things she needed to do before morning. The kind of mental list you make when the emergency has arrived, and panic is a luxury you cannot afford. She thought about the document she'd signed. She thought about the condo, held only in Harlan's name because he'd said it was simpler from a tax standpoint. She thought about the joint account he managed and the supplementary card she used, which he could cancel with a phone call. Then she thought about Sabine. Sabine Gelinas had been her best friend since nursing school. She was now a family court paralegal in Toronto, with a particular combination of warmth and pragmatism that Rowena had always leaned on in difficult seasons. Rowena texted her at 2:47 in the morning, "I need to talk to you. It's urgent, and I'm sorry for the hour." Sabine's reply came in 4 minutes. "Calling you now." They talked until 5. By the end of the call, Sabine had already texted the name of a family lawyer in Montreal, a woman named Patricia Holt who, Sabine said, had handled cases like this before, more often than anyone liked to admit. She also said something that Rowena wrote down on the back of the receipt from the blazer pocket and kept. "You don't leave when you're ready. You leave when you're prepared." Over the next 3 weeks, Rowena was very She opened a personal account at a different bank, the Caisse Desjardins branch on Côte des Neiges, using her maiden name and her sister's address in Halifax as her mailing address. She transferred small amounts, irregular, never more than a few hundred at a time, into it from her own nursing pay. She'd gone back to per diem shifts when the twins came home, and Harlan had stopped asking about her schedule. She built an encrypted file on a cloud storage account Harlan didn't know about, and she populated it. Photographs of the emails, the insurance document, the restaurant receipts, screenshots of Harlan's calendar, a log of every night he'd been absent, and every time he'd missed a feeding or a pediatric appointment, time-stamped. She arranged for Patricia Holt to subpoena the original signed document. She said nothing. She cooked dinner when she had the energy. She handed Harlan his coffee in the mornings. She kept her face neutral when he said things like, "You seem distant lately, and I'm worried about you, Ro." She understood, with the strange calm that had settled over her since that night in the kitchen, that she was living inside his plan, and she needed to finish building hers before he noticed. The close call came on a Thursday. Harlan came home early, something he almost never did, and found Rowena at the kitchen table with the laptop open and a folder of documents spread around her. She had been assembling a timeline. She closed the laptop in the same motion she used to pull a chart from a patient's bedside, smooth and unhurried, and looked up. "Working on something?" Harlan said, setting down his bag. His voice was light, but his eyes moved to the papers. "Maternity leave paperwork," Rowena said. "The hospital system changed. It's a nightmare." He crossed the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. She could feel him behind her, assessing. The twins were asleep down the hall. The apartment felt very, very small. "Anything I can help with?" he said. "No," she said. "You know how I am with paperwork. I just need to work through it myself." He stood there a moment longer. Then he said okay and walked to the bedroom. Rowena did not exhale audibly. She counted to 20 in her head, then closed the folder, slid the documents into her work bag, and moved everything out of the condo the next morning while he was at the office. Patricia Holt had been quietly preparing the case for 2 weeks. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses she removed to make important points. And she had the precise, unrattled manner of someone who had sat across from a great many frightened women and helped them find the floor under their feet. She explained to Rowena, at their third meeting, that the document Harlan had her sign was almost certainly unenforceable. It had not been witnessed, had not been accompanied by independent legal advice, and had been signed under conditions a court would find coercive. She also explained that in Quebec, under civil law, Rowena's rights as the primary caregiver of the twins would weigh heavily in any custody determination, regardless of what Harlan's lawyer had drafted. "He planned this," Rowena said. "He tried to," Patricia said. "There's a difference." The escape itself was quieter than Rowena had expected. She had rehearsed the morning in her mind so many times that when it actually came, it felt almost unremarkable, just another thing she was doing carefully. Harlan left for a morning meeting at 7:40. She waited 10 minutes. She loaded the twins into their infant car seats, lifted them to the elevator with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times in the dark. The diaper bag was already packed. The documents were already in the car. She'd put them there the previous afternoon, tucked under the rear seat, tucked behind a flap of fabric, in a bag that looked like gym clothes. She drove north on the Laurentian autoroute in the gray February morning. Snow was coming down in the particular flat, windless way it does in Quebec in winter. Each flake falling straight, no drama. The twins slept. The radio played softly. Rowena kept both hands on the wheel and did not look in the rearview mirror any more than necessary. She was going to her sister's place in Bay St. Paul. Harlan had been there once, briefly, and hadn't liked the quiet. He wouldn't think of it first. That was the point. Her sister Amara met her at the door, still in her housecoat, a mug of tea held in both hands. She looked at Rowena's face and then at the twins strapped to their carriers, and she said simply, "Come in." She didn't ask questions until later. That was one of the things Rowena had always loved about her. The Charlevoix winter settled around them, in the way it always had. Heavy and blue and profound, the river iron-gray below the cliff. Rowena nursed the twins in the early mornings in the rocking chair by the window, watching the light come up over the water, and she felt something she hadn't felt in months. The particular steadiness that comes from having made the right decision. She was not without fear. There were nights when she lay awake, listening to the twins breathe, and the fear crawled in. About the court dates, about what Harlan's lawyer would argue, about whether she'd made errors she didn't know about yet. On those nights, she texted Patricia Holt through the encrypted messaging app the lawyer had set up, and Patricia, either awake at midnight herself or simply diligent enough to have alerts, would respond within the hour, always in the same tone. Measured, clear, reminding Rowena exactly what the plan was and where they stood. Harlan found out about Patricia through a mutual contact, apparently, and called her office directly. Patricia had not taken the call. A letter from Harlan's lawyer arrived the following week, claiming that Rowena had removed the children without consent. Patricia filed her response the same day, attaching the evidence file, the timeline, the subpoenaed document, and a statement from Rowena's OB/GYN regarding the conditions under which she had signed the insurance document. The emergency motion Harlan filed to determine custody was heard 6 weeks later in Montreal. Rowena took the train down with Amara, who sat beside her in the courtroom and said nothing, but whose presence felt like ballast. Harlan was already seated when they arrived. He looked at Rowena the way he always had when she surprised him. Not with anger first, but with recalibration, that split second of assessment before the expression settled. She watched him do it and felt almost nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, just recognition. Patricia was methodical. She presented the evidence in sequence, building the picture piece by piece the way a skilled clinician documents a case. Factual, precise, letting the record do the work. The judge, a woman in her early 60s named Justice Beaumont, asked several pointed questions about the document Harlan had Rowena sign. Harlan's lawyer argued it was immaterial. Justice Beaumont moved on without agreeing. Harlan testified that Rowena had been struggling, that he had been concerned about postpartum depression, that she had become erratic and withdrawn, that he had only been trying to protect his family. He said it convincingly. He was a convincing man. Patricia called Rowena's OB-GYN first. Then the NICU nurse who had cared for the twins and who, Rowena had not known until Patricia told her, had documented the attendance log of each visit. How many hours each parent had been present and when. Then Patricia called Sabine, who testified as a paralegal and as a witness to the phone call on the night Rowena first reached out. The attendance log was what broke Harlan's case open. It was the sort of detail he hadn't thought to anticipate, the kind of quiet institutional record that exists for ordinary purposes and becomes devastating in a courtroom. In 6 weeks of NICU visits, Rowena had been present for 41 of the 52 daily visiting slots. Harlan had been present for 9. Justice Beaumont didn't look at Harlan when she delivered the decision. She looked at her notes. Primary physical and legal custody was awarded to Rowena. Harlan was granted supervised visitation, to be reviewed in 12 months. The insurance document was ruled unenforceable and set aside. The condo was flagged for property division proceedings. Rowena heard it the way she heard codes called on the unit, her mind very still, already moving to what comes next. Outside the courthouse, the February air was sharp and clear in the particular way it gets in Montreal when the cold is serious. Amara took her arm. Patricia said, "We'll talk this week about next steps on the property," and shook her hand. Rowena stood on the steps for a moment. Below her, taxis moved through the slush on Notre Dame Street. The city looked exactly as it always had. Enormous and unhurried and entirely indifferent to the small specific weight that had just been lifted from her chest. She took out her phone and called the twins' daycare in Bay St. Paul to confirm pickup time. Then she put her phone away and walked down the steps. There is a version of this story where Rowena Ashby is rescued, where some man or miracle appears at the right moment and delivers her from the situation. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and harder and more real. A woman who noticed, then thought, then planned, then acted, step by step, in the dark, while feeding 2 infants and keeping her face neutral across the breakfast table, from a man who had underestimated her capacity to do all of that. She went back to full-time nursing that spring. Pediatric, at a hospital in Quebec City, where she'd applied the previous November, before the court date, because Patricia had advised her to establish financial independence proactively. The commute from Bay St. Paul was manageable. Amara had agreed, without being asked, to extend her stay for the first 3 months. The twins grew the way infants do, fast enough to make the previous week feel like fiction. Her son developed an opinion about socks. Her daughter began to laugh at things that weren't, as far as Rowena could determine, conventionally funny. Both of them liked being outside in the stroller, regardless of weather. They were Quebecois babies through and through. Harlan called sometimes through the channels Patricia had established. The supervised visits were brief and logistically managed. He was quieter than he used to be. Rowena did not think much about what that meant for him. She had learned, in the months since February, to keep her attention on what was in front of her rather than on what was behind. There is a bench in the Montmorency Falls Park, just above where the river narrows before it drops. On good days when she was not working and the twins were in their stroller and the season cooperated, Rowena walked out there in the late afternoon. The falls made noise enough to fill everything. Below, the river did what it had always done. Moved forward, indifferent to the particular difficulty of the terrain, finding the path that was available rather than mourning the ones that weren't. She was not rebuilt yet. She understood that rebuilding was not an event but a practice. Some mornings were hard in ways she didn't always have words for. Some nights the fear still came. But it came less, and it lasted shorter, and she knew better now what to do with it. She held her daughter up to see the falls. Her daughter reached for the mist. That was enough for that day. It was enough.